In this demo, we're going to look at some Android essentials. We're going to first take a look at the Android SDK AVD Manager and create some virtual devices with specific characteristics that we want to test for. Then we're going to take a look at how to create a new Android project in Eclipse, and we're going to explore the various files that are in the project directory that the tools create for us. And then we're going to explore how to create the various image assets we need in Gimp in order to ensure density independence in the application that we want to publish. And then we're also going to take a first look at the linear layout, and we're going to add our image to it and look at how we center it and so forth. And we're going to also take a look at how we can support multiple languages in our application independent of the application's code. And then we're going to run the application that we've modified and show you how run it in the emulator and confirm that the appropriate resources are being used.
All right, let's begin by creating a few Android emulator devices. So I'm going to go in, I'm in Eclipse here, and I'm going to go to the Window menu and then down to Android SDK AVD Manager. And I've already got a few created, but let's just go through and create a new one. So not a real inventive name here, but I'm going to go with Google API level 8, that's 2.2, and give it a SD card, enable the snapshot, and let's go to let's do a normal HDPI, and the skin for that one will be this guy. This guy will give me a normal HDPI device by default. So I'm at, my density here is 240 DPI, which puts me in the high category. So let's go ahead and create that. Alright, so now I've got my test device here, and it's going to be a normal size screen with high density. And I can start this by just clicking the start button. And one of the things that's useful here is when you start to get into these larger screens or in higher densities, sometimes they won't necessarily fit well on your little tiny notebook or netbook, especially when you're hooked up to a really low res projector like I am. So you've got this capability to actually scale it. So I could scale it down to about 12% of scale it down by 12% before I launch it, and then I know that it'll actually fit on this particular, well, not quite, I should have went down smaller. So anyways, now it's booting this device up, and it's going to have those properties that I just gave it. So while that's going, let's go ahead and create a new Android project. So I'm going to close this out. So to create a project, I'm just going to go to New in Eclipse and go to Android Project and give it a name. And I'm going to once again target Google API level 8, 2.2, and package name. I thought it, oh, where's my package? There it is. Yeah, I gotta fill in. And package name here, you want to name these, just like you typically name your packages in Java. So whatever organization structure you're using, I'll just use Grand Valley. And I'm going to go with 8 here as well. And once I do this, now it has created a kind of a skeleton project for me. It's put on all the essential pieces that we talked about tonight when we did the Android anatomy. So I got my source directory where all my Java source code is going to be, and if we go down and open that up, you'll see there is an actual activity there, and it doesn't do much. And we'll talk about the insides of this next week, but it essentially just sets view on one of those layouts that's been declaratively defined in my resource hierarchy. But notice the reference here, and we'll talk about this next week in detail, but it doesn't say anything about, LDPI, HD, right? It just says you want to use the main layout. And then based on what device it's in, it's going to go off to the particular directory of interest and find the layout it wants. Okay? But we'll look at that next week. Gen is where all the generated stuff is, and we'll talk about that next week as well. Assets is just an empty directory right now because I have no assets. And then the resource directory, which has subdirectories for HDPI, LDPI, and MDPI. And you'll notice there is a PNG in each of these. Okay, so it used its default icon when it created this, and this is the launcher icon by default. And it's just the little Android guy. So here's the, if I double click it, there's the HDPI version. Okay, there's the MDPI. I'm sorry, the LDPI. And this one should be somewhere in between those two. Okay, so you can see the different sizes here. So it just generates. So obviously in my app, I'd want to create my own icon, and there's some guidelines on how you want to do that and stylistically how you want to do that. And then I'd want to put those in myself. But what I want to do is I want to go in and tinker a little bit with the layout, and I want to change the application. So by default, this is up and running now. So by default, what it's doing, if we look in the layouts, I've only got a single layout, and it's in the default directory called layout. And if I click that, and I look at it in XML View here, you can see it's really simple. It's got a linear layout. So I've got a single linear layout, and then within that I got a single text view. And it's simply displaying some text on a view. And since I only got one text view, the layout really doesn't make much difference here at this point. And the text view itself is displaying something, and I've got this funky @string hello here. And it turns out that that's a reference to another resource. So I've got a bunch of strings that I can define, and they are down in my resource directory under values. So I've got this file called strings.xml, and sure enough, I've got a string in there called hello that has the value setting hello world my activity. So this is kind of scaffolding, if you will. It's just some generic stuff that it created kind of a skeleton app and threw it in there. So if I run this app, it's just going to put this string up on the screen. That's all it's going to do. So let's quickly check that. So I can right click, run as Android app, and what it will do is it will just install it right on this emulator that was already running, and it will run it. If I had more than one device attached, more than one emulator running, or more than one physical device, it would probably prompt me and say which of these devices you want us to run on. So there, that's all my app does. So it was just compiled and installed on the device, and it just puts up that text string. So let's go into that layout, and let's change the UI a little bit. So I'm going to exit here with the back button, back to the home screen here, and let's go into the layout and change things around a little bit. And initially, you might want to be doing this with the GUI facility that's built into Eclipse here, just as you get familiar with the different attributes that are available and their values. And so that's what I'll demo. And one of the things in my version of Eclipse it does is, for some reason over here, platform-wise, it's been defaulting to Android 3, which gives me problems. If I switch this back to 2.2, which I've targeted, everything's fine. So I don't know if you notice that problem in your environment, but you should have a little display here, a mock-up of your UI. And if it was blank like mine was, you might want to make sure your platform level here over on the right, right here, is set correctly. All right, and there's some things we can play with here. There's some control knobs here, so I can switch from landscape to portrait. So the app's not running right now. It's just processing the layout file and giving me kind of an approximation of what it might look like on the mobile device screen. So that's kind of convenient when we're developing. So let's add an image. Okay, so I want to put an image onto the screen. So what I can do is go over here to my tool panel and just grab an image view and drag it up there. Okay? Now it put my image underneath, but I want to put it on the top. I think there's a way to do this. So if I go like this, okay, I can kind of grab and drag these things around and arrange them however I want. Notice the image it put in there. Okay, it put in, it's the only image that's in the project. And so what it did was it set my image to my icon image, because it's the only drawable I got in there right now. And I can see this by going over here to the outline and double clicking it, and then all the properties on that particular UI element are down here. So if we go down to the source element, that's where we're going to tell it what image asset to use. You'll see that it used @drawable icon. That's saying take the icon resource and it's going to grab whichever one matches the current density, because I had 3 of them on there, and it's going to put it in there. So I want to change that. I want to add another image. I want to put a nice image in there myself. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a dog picture up there, and I got this guy I grabbed off Google Image Search. And so I want to put this image, and I want to center it on the screen and have the text underneath it, but I want to create myself several different versions of this for the various densities. So I'll start out, let me just open this up in my image editor, and I'm using Gimp here, which is a freebie. It's the GNU image editor, so if you don't already have Photoshop or something really fancy, Gimp works just fine. It has all the basic functionality you need. And so this one is size-wise 300 by 400, and that'll work for an HDPI screen. So let's do one more thing, just so we can prove to ourselves it's using the right image. I'm going to drop some text onto this image. So I'm going to go over here and grab my text tool, and I'm going to put down here HDPI. So I know that when this thing displays on my mobile device, it's you wouldn't normally do this, but I'm doing this just so I can prove to you that it's grabbing the right image. So let's save this, and we're going to go over to my workspace, to that project I just created, and under Resources, here is my HDPI directory, so I'm going to save my pup image right there. Yeah, and this is kind of goofy because okay, so there's that one, and then I want to create a scaled down version of let's do MDPI next. And so I'm going to scale it down. So I'm just going to go in here and scale, and let's see, here we're at 300. So the baseline, we're going to want to go down by 1/3. So if I go to 200 and I keep my aspect ratio, it's going to automatically scale the other dimension for me. So let's save that one, and we're going to put that one in the medium density directory. And we'll do one more LDPI. And we'll scale this guy down to another 1/4, right? So we're going to want to be 150. And this goes into LDPI. Okay, so they're all called pup JPEG, but they're all different sizes. Okay, and now I'm going to go back to Eclipse. And one of the things I got to do, I just added those resources, but I got to tell Eclipse to refresh and load those. So I got to hit F5. Now my Mac, I think I got to do a function F5. And so when I do that, it picks up those new pup images. Now it's very important that Eclipse does that refresh, because what's happening in Eclipse is there's a packaging tool part of the Android toolkit that's running right now behind the scenes. And whenever a new image pops into that directory, it's going to generate some new code under that gen directory that I can use programmatically to reference these things. Okay, so if Eclipse doesn't know about these assets that I'm adding under the resource directory, then when I go into my code and I try to reference them and stuff, it's going to be like they're not there. So be sure you explicitly, when you add stuff. The other thing I could have done is if they were in my file system and I explicitly dragged them into these folders, then Eclipse knows because you're actually giving it the drag event. But if you're kind of behind the scenes, at the command line or in the folder pulling it into your workspace, make sure Eclipse gets an update and knows about it. So let's go back into that layout now, and let's go down to this guy, and let's tell him to use that new image that I just added. So we'll go to the source attribute once again, and when I select it, there's a little dot 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 over here on the right. When I click it, notice how now it knows that resource is in the directory, and it gives me the option to pick it. So I'm going to pick pup here, okay, and notice it picked the LDPI version of it. Well, that's because I'm in this QVGA display here. So if I switch over to here, okay, now I'm in an MDPI, and so forth. So I can simulate it there. But let's do some more things here. Let's go to let's center some things. So let's get this image to center vertically. So if I select the image, there's an attribute for that as well. So if I go down to miscellaneous and then layout gravity, click, and it tells me all the options. So I want to center horizontally, okay, and I want to do the same thing with the text. So I select the text, and I'm going to go to same thing, center horizontally. Okay. Oh, notice it didn't center. Okay. Well, what's going on here is the width is set to fill parent, and we said fill parent says pick everything you got. Okay, and so its parent is the layout, and its parent layout width is fill parent as well. So what I need to do here is say, don't take everything, wrap content, just take what you need, and it should be centered. Okay? Now, one last thing is I'd like all this stuff to be centered vertically as well. So one of the things I should do is go back to here. Actually, I can do this in the layout. So if I go to the layout, and say, instead of height, fill parent, I'm going to tell it to wrap content, so just take what you need, and then in gravity, I'm going to tell it to center vertically. Bingo. Now it centers vertically. Now, one last little detail that I want to do is, let's say I want to, that's a text prompt, and let's say I want to support other languages. So let's go into the string file here, and first of all, let's change hello to just hello. Okay, so if I go back to my main, it says hello, and let's say I want to support the Dutch language, which is the closest thing I have to a second language. So what I'm going to do here is create an alternate set of resources for that language. So I'm just going to go here and copy this folder, and then I'm going to go up here and paste it, and I'm going to name it values-nl for the Dutch language, and then I'm going to go down here and open it and go to this string, and I'm going to put my translation in here. Now if I go back to my layout, it's still displaying English, but I should be able to switch my language here, and now it's picking another resource. Okay, so if we run this on the emulator itself, so let's say run as an Android application, and this could get hairy because half of my device is not on the screen here. Okay, so there it is running an HDPI in English. So one of the things I can do here, I'm gonna have to run this smaller. So let me go back and start a different emulator. Let's do a let's do an MDBI, and let's start it. And this one I'm going to take and then what it gives me. All right. So let's run on this guy. Okay, so now it's running in MDPI on this one, but let's go and go into our settings here, and let's see if that language thingy is working. So if I go to the language and keyboard settings and choose a different language, so let's go and pick NL. Okay, and then if I back out, and my app is installed, so I should be able to. Okay, and then notice, maybe kind of hard to see in the back there, but notice down there that string is actually translated now because my device is running with a different language setting. Okay, now the one trick there is you got to make sure if you don't speak the language, you know, you're going to want to make sure when you go back into your menus to turn it back on, you know, you got to you got to know enough of the language to be able to go back and find the settings again. Okay, so make sure you kind of make a mental note of the number of clicks or go out and learn the language.